A violent cough shook Rebecca Zimmerman's entire body as the wagon train lurched over another deep rut in the trail. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, her heart sinking when she pulled it away and saw flecks of blood against the white linen. She quickly tucked it into her sleeve before anyone could notice, but it was too late. Mrs. Peterson, the wagon master's wife, had seen everything from her perch on the wagon bench ahead. The year was 1859, and the California gold rush was still drawing hopeful souls westward across the harsh American frontier. Rebecca had joined the wagon train in Independence, Missouri, 3 weeks prior, her meager savings invested in this journey toward a new life. At 23, with both parents recently deceased from influenza, she had nothing left in Ohio except memories and debts. California promised opportunity. A teaching position awaited her in Sacramento, arranged through her father's old colleague. "Stop the wagons." The wagon master's voice boomed across the line of covered vehicles winding through the Wyoming territory. The sudden command sent a ripple of tension through the travelers. Unexpected stops usually meant trouble: Indians, bandits, or some other danger of the trail. Rebecca's wagon, driven by a kind elderly couple who had offered her passage in exchange for cooking and mending, rolled to a halt. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass as Mr. Peterson, a burly man with a beard like steel wool, strode toward their wagon with his wife trailing behind. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, his face stern beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Step down, if you please." Confused, Rebecca climbed down from the wagon, her legs wobbly after hours of sitting. She stood facing the wagon master and his wife, aware that other travelers were watching the confrontation with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Peterson tells me you're spitting blood," Mr. Peterson said without preamble. "That means consumption." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "No, sir, it's just, don't lie to me, girl. My sister died of the consumption. I know the signs." His voice was hard, but his eyes held a glint of fear. "We can't risk it spreading through the train." Mrs. Peterson nodded vigorously. "Think of the children, Miss Zimmerman. We've already lost 3 people on this journey. We can't risk losing more." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can't continue with us." Mr. Peterson's tone was final. "We'll leave you provisions for 2 weeks. There's a settlement about 50 miles back. You can make it there if you're strong enough." "You're leaving me here." Rebecca's voice rose in disbelief. "Alone." In Indian territory. The elderly couple who had given her passage looked distressed, but remained silent in their wagon seat. No one spoke up in her defense. "It's for the good of everyone," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice falsely gentle. "We can't risk an outbreak." As the reality of her situation sank in, Rebecca felt lightheaded with fear. Abandoned on the frontier with only a fortnight's provisions, it was practically a death sentence. She opened her mouth to protest again when a deep voice cut through the murmurs of the gathered crowd. "I'll stay with her." All heads turned to see a tall figure approaching from one of the rear wagons. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the saddle, spurs jingling softly with each step. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but Rebecca could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Wyatt Owens," Mr. Peterson acknowledged with a nod. "This isn't your concern. Begging your pardon, but I'm making it my concern." Wyatt stopped beside Rebecca, and she was suddenly conscious of his height. He stood at least a head taller than her. "My pa was a doctor. I know consumption when I see it, and I know how to tend to the sick." "You'd risk your own health?" Mrs. Peterson asked incredulously. "I've been exposed before. Never caught it." Wyatt's voice remained steady. "Besides, my destination isn't California. I'm headed to Fort Laramie after this. I can see the lady to safety there or back to the settlement once she's well enough to travel." Rebecca stared up at this stranger offering her salvation. His offer seemed too good to be true. "Sir, I couldn't ask. You didn't ask," he said quietly, looking down at her with eyes that held no judgment, only calm determination. "I'm offering." Mr. Peterson considered for a long moment. "Your choice, Owens. But once we move out, we're not turning back for either of you." "Understood." Wyatt nodded. Within the hour, Rebecca watched in stunned silence as the wagon train prepared to depart without them. Wyatt efficiently unloaded his gear from the wagon. He'd been traveling with a sturdy pack horse, supplies, a small tent, and other essentials for frontier survival. The wagon master's men set aside a portion of communal supplies as promised: flour, salt pork, coffee, beans, and ammunition. As the last wagon rumbled away, Rebecca felt utterly abandoned despite Wyatt's presence. They stood together on the vast Wyoming plain, two solitary figures against the backdrop of the distant mountains, the dust from the departed wagon train still hanging in the air. "Why?" she finally asked, turning to face her unexpected protector. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Wyatt was securing the last of their supplies onto his pack horse. He straightened and adjusted his hat before meeting her gaze. "My mother died of consumption when I was 10. No one would help her." His words were simple, matter-of-fact, but Rebecca could sense the old pain beneath them. "I couldn't ride away knowing I was leaving someone to the same fate." A coughing fit seized Rebecca before she could respond. When it passed, she found Wyatt holding out a canteen. "Drink," he instructed. Small sips. She obeyed, the water cool against her raw throat. "I'm Rebecca Zimmerman," she said, realizing they hadn't been properly introduced in all the commotion. "Wyatt Owens." He took back the canteen and capped it. "We should make camp before dark. There's a creek about a quarter-mile ahead. It'll be a good spot to rest." As Rebecca followed him toward the creek, she was torn between gratitude for his presence and terror at what lay ahead. Her illness, the wilderness, and a man she knew nothing about except his name and his apparent willingness to risk his life for hers. The creek proved to be a small but steady stream cutting through a gentle depression in the prairie. A few cottonwood trees provided shelter, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Wyatt worked efficiently, setting up a small camp with practiced ease. He erected a simple canvas tent, built a fire ring, and tethered his horses where they could graze on the lush grass near the water. Rebecca tried to help, but another coughing spell left her dizzy and weak. She sat on a fallen log, feeling useless and increasingly frightened by the severity of her condition. "Don't push yourself," Wyatt said, noticing her distress. He handed her a cup of water. "Rest. I'll have a fire going soon." As twilight deepened into night, Wyatt prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. The smell of food cooking over an open fire would normally have been appetizing, but Rebecca found she had little appetite. Still, she forced herself to eat a few bites, knowing she needed strength to fight whatever illness had taken hold of her. "How long have you been coughing blood?" Wyatt asked directly, sitting across the fire from her. Rebecca hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option now. 3 days. "It started as just a persistent cough a week ago. I thought it was dust from the trail." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "Could be consumption, could be pneumonia. Either way, you need rest and care." He added more wood to the fire. "First thing tomorrow, I'll make you a tea from some herbs I carry. It'll help ease the coughing." "Mr. Owens, Wyatt," he corrected. "Wyatt," she acknowledged with a small nod. "I need to be honest. If this is consumption, it could be months before I recover, if I recover at all." The reality of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. You can't possibly intend to stay with me all that time. His expression remained steady in the flickering firelight. Let's worry about getting you through the next few days first. Then we'll decide what comes next. Rebecca wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. Instead, she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and gazed into the flames. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't spoken up." Wyatt didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. "Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman. The tent's ready for you. I'll keep watch out here." That first night alone in the wilderness, Rebecca slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by visions of being left behind and forgotten. Each time she woke, coughing and disoriented, she would see the steady glow of the campfire through the tent flap and hear the occasional movements of Wyatt keeping his vigil outside. It was small comfort, but enough to allow her to drift back to sleep. Morning brought a fresh wave of fever and a cough that seemed determined to tear her lungs apart. Wyatt entered the tent with a steaming cup of tea that smelled of wild herbs and honey. "This will help," he said, helping her to sit up. "Small sips." The tea was bitter despite the honey, but it soothed her raw throat. As she drank, Rebecca studied her benefactor in the morning light. Wyatt Owens appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His hands, she noticed, were strong and capable but moved with surprising gentleness as he checked her forehead for fever. "You're burning up," he muttered, concern etching lines around his eyes. "We need to get that fever down." Over the next 3 days, Rebecca's condition worsened. The fever raged, leaving her delirious at times. Wyatt was a constant presence, bathing her forehead with cool water from the creek, brewing medicinal teas, and coaxing her to eat when she could manage it. During her lucid moments, she was acutely aware of the intimate care he provided, helping her drink, supporting her when she needed to leave the tent for personal needs, even holding back her hair when the coughing led to retching. On the 4th night, the fever broke. Rebecca woke just before dawn, her nightdress soaked with sweat, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. Wyatt was dozing at the tent entrance, his back against a saddle, a rifle across his lap, a position he had maintained throughout her illness. "Wyatt," she whispered, her voice hoarse from coughing. He was instantly alert, moving to her side. "How do you feel?" "Better," she said, surprised to find it was true. The crushing weight on her chest had eased somewhat, and though she still felt weak, the fog of fever had lifted. "I think the fever broke." Relief washed over his features as he felt her forehead. "Yes, it has. That's good, very good." He offered her water, which she took gratefully. "You had me worried. I'm sorry to be such a burden." "Don't apologize for being sick," he said firmly. "It's not something you chose." As dawn broke over the prairie, casting golden light through the tent opening, Rebecca found herself studying Wyatt's face. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his cheeks were shadowed with several days' growth of beard. He had clearly slept little while caring for her. "You should rest," she told him. "I'm feeling much better," he nodded, exhaustion evident in his movements. "I'll catch a few hours after I check the horses and get breakfast started." But before he could rise, Rebecca reached out and caught his hand. The gesture surprised them both. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life." His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in these days of intense dependency and care. Then he gently extracted his hand from hers and stood. "You're not out of the woods yet, Miss Zimmerman," he said, but his voice was kind. "Rest some more. I'll be right outside." Though her fever had broken, Rebecca's recovery was slow. The cough persisted, though less violently, and her strength returned in small increments. Wyatt proved to be not only a capable nurse, but also an excellent provider. He hunted rabbit and prairie hen, fished in the creek, and gathered wild onions and berries to supplement their supplies. A week after being left behind by the wagon train, Rebecca felt strong enough to sit outside by the fire for extended periods. The fresh air seemed to help her breathing, and she found herself looking forward to the quiet conversations she and Wyatt shared as they ate their evening meals. She learned that he had been born in Kentucky, but had spent most of his life roaming the frontier. His father had indeed been a doctor who taught him about herbs and healing, but Wyatt had chosen a different path, working as a scout, a hunter, occasionally a drover on cattle drives. He spoke little of his personal life, deflecting questions with the skill of a man accustomed to keeping his own counsel. Why were you heading to California with the wagon train if Fort Laramie was your destination? Rebecca asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Wyatt poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. I wasn't, he admitted. I joined the train in Cheyenne when they needed an extra gun after losing a man to fever. Rebecca frowned. So you lied to Mr. Peterson? Not entirely. Wyatt's expression remained neutral. I am heading to Fort Laramie eventually, just hadn't planned on it being so soon. And what's in Fort Laramie? Work, possibly. I know the commander there. He turned the conversation. What about you? Why California? Rebecca explained about the teaching position waiting for her in Sacramento. It's not much, just a small school for minors' children, but it's a fresh start. She sighed, gazing into the flames. Though I suppose that's all gone now. They'll have found someone else by the time I could get there, if I ever can. You'll get there, Wyatt said with quiet confidence. Maybe not when you planned, but you'll get there. His certainty was comforting, though Rebecca couldn't help wondering how he could be so sure. As the days passed, she began to feel stronger, venturing further from camp, helping with small tasks, and even assisting Wyatt in gathering herbs and berries. Their isolation created an unusual intimacy. They learned each other's habits and rhythms, developing a wordless understanding that required little explanation. On the 10th day, Wyatt returned from hunting with a concerned expression. What is it? Rebecca asked, looking up from where she was mending a tear in her skirt. Saw signs of a Cheyenne hunting party about 3 miles west, he said, beginning to break down their camp with efficient movements. We need to move. Alarm shot through Rebecca. Are they hostile? Can't say for sure. Relations have been tense since the Army increased patrols in the territory. Wyatt was already packing their supplies. Better not to find out. Can you ride today? Rebecca hesitated. She'd ridden horses before but wasn't an experienced rider. And her strength, while improved, was far from fully restored. I can try. Wyatt nodded, then disappeared into the trees, returning with a sturdy pinto that she hadn't seen before. This is Dot, he explained, patting the horse's neck. She's steady and gentle. Been grazing downstream these past days. Within an hour, they had broken camp completely. Wyatt helped Rebecca mount Dot, then checked the saddle cinch one final time. We'll head east, he said, mounting his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding. There's a trapper's cabin about 15 miles from here. We can shelter there for a few days until I'm sure we're not being followed. They rode at a slow pace to accommodate Rebecca's weakness. Despite the mild day, she found herself exhausted after just a few hours in the saddle. Her chest ached and the persistent cough returned with a vengeance. By mid-afternoon, she was swaying dangerously, clinging to the saddle horn to keep from falling. Wyatt, she called weakly, I need to stop. He was at her side instantly, reaching up to steady her as she slumped forward. Hold on, he urged. Just a little further. There's a stand of trees ahead where we can rest. The small grove provided welcome shade. Wyatt helped Rebecca dismount, supporting most of her weight as her legs buckled beneath her. He lowered her gently to the ground, propping her against a tree trunk. "I'm sorry," she whispered between labored breaths. "I thought I was stronger. You're doing fine." He offered her water, then checked her forehead. "No fever, that's good. It's just exhaustion." They rested for an hour, during which Rebecca dozed fitfully against the tree. When she woke, Wyatt was fashioning a sort of support from rope and a blanket attached to his saddle. "What are you doing?" she asked. "You can't ride alone the rest of the way," he explained. "You'll ride with me. This will help keep you secure." The arrangement was intimate by necessity. Rebecca sat in front of Wyatt on his horse, her back against his chest, his arms around her to hold the reins. The makeshift harness kept her from falling when exhaustion overtook her. Dot followed behind, tethered to Wyatt's saddle. As they rode, Rebecca drifted in and out of awareness. In her more lucid moments, she was acutely conscious of Wyatt's solid presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the strength in his arms as he guided the horse. There was something undeniably comforting about being held so securely after days of feeling her body betray her with weakness. By nightfall, they reached the trapper's cabin, a crude but sturdy structure built of logs and chinked with mud. It consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Wyatt carried Rebecca inside and settled her on the cot before returning to care for the horses. The cabin was dusty and smelled of disuse, but it offered welcome shelter from the wilderness. Rebecca managed to sit up and look around as Wyatt brought in their supplies and lit a fire in the hearth. "Whose cabin is this?" she asked. "Old trapper named Mackenzie. He's probably up in the high country this time of year. He doesn't mind travelers using it when he's gone." Wyatt moved about the small space with familiarity. "I've stayed here a few times before." The fire quickly warmed the small cabin. Wyatt prepared a simple supper of jerky softened in a broth with wild onions. Rebecca ate what she could, then leaned back against the wall, watching as Wyatt cleaned their few dishes using water from a barrel outside. "You should take the cot," she said when he returned. "You've barely slept in days." "I'm fine on the floor," he replied, unrolling his bedroll near the hearth. "You need the rest more than I do." Rebecca wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. Instead, she asked a question that had been on her mind. "Do you think it's consumption? Truly?" Wyatt paused in his preparations for sleep. "I can't say for certain. My pa would know better. But the fever breaking so quickly makes me think it might be pneumonia instead. Either way, you need time to heal. And if it is consumption, will you leave me then?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing her deepest fear. In the flickering firelight, Wyatt's expression was solemn. "No, Rebecca, I won't leave you." It was the first time he had called her by her given name, and something about the way he said it made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with her illness. "You should get some sleep," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We're safe here for now." Rebecca lay down, pulling the rough blanket over her. As she drifted toward sleep, she realized with sudden clarity that somewhere along the way, this stranger had become the person she trusted most in the world. The days at the trapper's cabin fell into a peaceful rhythm. Rebecca's strength returned more quickly now that they weren't constantly moving, and the persistent cough gradually eased. Wyatt continued to prepare herbal remedies for her, hunted for fresh meat, and even found time to make repairs to the cabin's leaky roof. 2 weeks after arriving at the cabin, Rebecca woke before dawn and slipped outside, careful not to disturb Wyatt, who was still sleeping near the hearth. The air was crisp with early autumn, and the stars were fading as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked to the small stream that flowed about 50 yards from the cabin. For the first time since falling ill, she felt truly herself again. The crushing weakness had receded, and though she still coughed occasionally, it no longer tore at her lungs with every breath. She knelt by the stream and splashed cool water on her face, then sat on a flat rock to watch the sunrise. She didn't hear Wyatt approach until he was almost beside her. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness. "You're up early," he said, settling beside her on the rock. "I feel better," she replied, smiling. "Better than I have in weeks." He studied her face in the growing light, his eyes thoughtful. "You look better. There's color in your cheeks again." They sat in companionable silence as the sun crested the horizon, painting the landscape in golden light. Rebecca was acutely aware of Wyatt's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "I've been thinking," Wyatt said finally. "Fort Laramie is about 5 days' ride from here. Once you're strong enough to travel, we could make for the fort. They have a proper doctor there who could look at you. And from there, you could either catch another wagon train west or take the stage back east." Rebecca felt an unexpected pang at the thought of parting ways. "And what about you?" "What will you do?" he shrugged. "What I always do, find work, keep moving." "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. "To keep moving, never settling anywhere?" Wyatt was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was reflective. "Never gave it much thought. After my mother died, my pa and I moved around a lot. Then after he passed, I just kept going. Seemed easier than stopping." "Easier than letting yourself care about people and places, you mean," Rebecca observed gently. His eyes met hers, surprised by her insight. "Maybe so." Rebecca looked away, back to the sunrise. "I understand that. After my parents died, I didn't want to stay in Ohio where everything reminded me of them. I thought California would be far enough away from the memories. And now," she considered the question. "Now I'm not sure running away is the answer. Maybe it's better to build something new instead." Wyatt nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "Maybe so." They returned to the cabin for breakfast, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness, a deeper understanding. As they went about their daily tasks, Rebecca found herself watching Wyatt when he wasn't looking, noticing the grace with which he moved, the thoughtful consideration he showed in everything he did. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Wyatt surprised her by asking about her life before joining the wagon train. She told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, her father's work as a teacher, her mother's skill with herbs and home remedies. "Is that where you learned about herbs?" Wyatt asked. "From your mother," Rebecca nodded. "She was known throughout the county for her healing touch. People would come from miles around when they were sick." Her voice softened with memory. "She would have known exactly what to do for my illness. Probably would have prevented it from getting so bad in the first place." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Rebecca smiled sadly. "I wish you could have met her. She would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" "Because you're kind," she said simply. "And you don't make a show of it. My mother always said true kindness doesn't announce itself." Wyatt looked uncomfortable with the praise. He stood and moved to the cabin's single window, looking out into the darkness. "We should think about leaving for Fort Laramie soon. Winter comes early in these parts." Rebecca felt the sudden change of subject like a physical withdrawal. "Of course," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Whenever you think best." The next morning, Rebecca woke to find Wyatt already gone from the cabin. A note on the table, written in surprisingly elegant handwriting, explained that he had gone hunting and would return by midday. She used the time alone to wash her clothes in the stream, and let them dry in the autumn sunshine, while she bathed herself as best she could with cold water and a sliver of soap from her dwindling supplies. It felt glorious to be clean again after weeks of illness and travel. She combed her damp hair and let it hang loose down her back to dry, then put on her freshly washed dress. Looking at her reflection in a small hand mirror from her bag, she was surprised to see how much her appearance had changed. Her face was thinner, but her eyes seemed brighter, more alive somehow. Wyatt returned as promised, carrying a brace of rabbits and a small sack of wild potatoes he had found. He stopped short when he saw her sitting outside the cabin, her hair gleaming in the sunlight. "You look rested," he said, seeming to search for the right word. Rebecca smiled. "I feel rested and clean. It's amazing what a difference that makes." Wyatt nodded, then busied himself with the rabbits, skinning and preparing them for a stew. Rebecca watched his capable hands at work, admiring the efficiency of his movements. There was something deeply comforting about witnessing his quiet competence. That evening, as they shared the rabbit stew, Rebecca broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Wyatt, I want to thank you properly for everything you've done for me." He shook his head. "No need." "There is a need," she insisted. "You sacrificed your own plans to help a stranger. You risked your health. You've provided for me and protected me." She took a deep breath. "I want you to know that once I reach California and secure my position, I'll send you payment for your troubles." Wyatt's expression hardened unexpectedly. "I don't want your money, Rebecca. But surely you must be compensated for. Is that what you think this is?" He interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "That I stayed with you for some future payment." Rebecca was taken aback by his reaction. "No, of course not. I just meant I didn't help you expecting anything in return." He set down his bowl and stood. "And I don't need charity." "It's not charity," she protested. "It's gratitude." But Wyatt was already moving toward the door. "I need to check the horses," he said, and was gone before she could respond. Rebecca sat by the fire, confused and hurt by the sudden tension. She hadn't meant to offend him, only to acknowledge her debt of gratitude. Perhaps he was tired of caring for her, tired of the responsibility she represented. The thought sent a pang of sadness through her heart. Wyatt returned an hour later, his expression guarded. He sat across from her at the table but didn't speak. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said into the silence. "I didn't mean to insult you." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't insult me. I overreacted." "Why?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "The last job I took before joining the Wagon train. It went badly. I was hired to guide a group of miners to a new strike in the mountains. Told them it was too late in the season, that snow would trap us, but they insisted. Offered double pay." His jaw tightened at the memory. 3 men died when an early blizzard hit. The survivors blamed me, said I led them there for the money. "That wasn't your fault," Rebecca said gently. "Maybe not, but it made me realize something." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I don't want to be the kind of man who puts a price on everything. What I did for you wasn't for payment. It was because it was the right thing to do." Rebecca nodded, understanding now. "I'm sorry. I won't mention payment again." The tension eased between them, but something else took its place, a new awareness, a deeper connection born of shared confidences. As they prepared for sleep that night, Rebecca found herself watching Wyatt's movements with a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with her illness. The next day dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn morning. Wyatt suggested they ride out to check the surrounding area before committing to the journey to Fort Laramie. Rebecca eagerly agreed, anxious to test her returning strength and to spend time with Wyatt away from the confines of the cabin. Dot proved to be as steady as Wyatt had promised. responding easily to Rebecca's guidance as they rode side by side across the rolling prairie. The landscape was beginning to change with the season, the grasses turning golden, wildflowers giving way to the russet and amber hues of autumn. They stopped to rest in a sheltered valley where a small copse of aspen trees shimmered with yellow leaves. Wyatt spread a blanket beneath the trees, and they shared a simple lunch of jerky, dried fruit, and corn bread that Rebecca had baked that morning in the cabin's fireplace. "This is lovely," Rebecca sighed, leaning back against a tree trunk. "I almost forgot what it was like to simply enjoy being outdoors." Wyatt smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. "You're looking stronger every day." "I feel stronger," she confirmed. "I barely coughed at all today." A comfortable silence fell between them as they enjoyed the peaceful setting. Rebecca found herself studying Wyatt's profile as he gazed out across the valley. In the weeks they had spent together, his face had become dear to her in ways she hadn't expected. She knew the small scar at the corner of his right eye, the way his mouth quirked up slightly when he was pleased, the thoughtful furrow of his brow when he was considering a problem. "What will you do when you reach Fort Laramie?" she asked suddenly. After we part ways." Wyatt glanced at her, then back to the horizon. "Not sure yet. Might winter there. The fort always needs hunters to supply meat. And after winter," he shrugged. "Haven't thought that far ahead." Rebecca gathered her courage. What if you came to California instead?" Wyatt turned to look at her fully, surprise evident in his expression. "To California?" "Yes." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "There would be work for someone with your skills, and—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "And I would be there." The implication hung in the air between them. Wyatt's eyes searched her face, something unreadable in his expression. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low and serious. "I'm not the kind of man who can offer a woman much. I don't have land or money or prospects." "I'm not asking for those things," she said quietly. "I'm just suggesting that maybe we don't have to part ways at Fort Laramie." Wyatt stood and walked a few paces away, his back to her. Rebecca's heart sank. She had misread the situation, misinterpreted his care for something more. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I spoke out of turn. Please forget I said anything." When Wyatt turned back to face her, his expression was troubled. "It's not that I don't want to," he said carefully, "but I've been alone a long time. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." Rebecca rose and moved to stand before him. "I understand," she said, meaning it. "Truly, I do." Their eyes held for a long moment. Then, with a gentleness that made her heart ache, Wyatt reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "We should head back," he said softly. "It'll be dark soon." They rode back to the cabin in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the familiar structure, Rebecca noticed something was wrong. The cabin door stood ajar, and their few belongings were scattered across the ground outside. Wyatt immediately signaled for her to stop. He dismounted and drew his rifle in one fluid motion. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and tense. "If there's trouble, ride for the creek bed and follow it north." Rebecca watched anxiously as Wyatt approached the cabin with cautious steps. He disappeared inside, and for several heart-stopping minutes she waited, straining to hear any sound of conflict. When he emerged again, his expression was grim. "Someone's been through our things," he reported, returning to her side. "Took most of our supplies, food, ammunition, your medicine." "Indians?" Rebecca asked, dismounting to survey the damage. "No," Wyatt shook his head. "White men, I'd guess. There are boot prints, and they left empty whiskey bottles. Probably deserters or outlaws passing through. They worked together to salvage what remained of their belongings and restore order to the cabin." The thieves had been thorough, nearly all their food was gone, along with Wyatt's spare ammunition and Rebecca's small bag of personal items, including the few pieces of jewelry she had brought from Ohio. "They even took my mother's locket," she said sadly, sitting at the table as night fell. "It was the only thing I had left of her." Wyatt's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I shouldn't have suggested we ride out today. If we'd stayed, then we might have been here when they arrived," she interrupted. "And who knows what would have happened then?" He nodded grimly, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Still, this changes things. We can't stay here now. We don't have enough supplies and they might come back." "So we go to Fort Laramie?" Rebecca asked. "Yes, but not directly." Wyatt was already mentally calculating. "We'll head southwest first, toward the old trading post at Clearwater Creek. It's a day's ride. We can resupply there, then continue to the fort." Rebecca nodded her agreement, trusting his judgment. They spent an uneasy night in the ransacked cabin, Wyatt keeping watch while Rebecca tried to sleep. She was acutely aware that their peaceful interlude was over. The harsh realities of the frontier had intruded, reminding them both of the dangers that lurked beyond their temporary sanctuary. They departed at first light, leaving behind the cabin that had sheltered them during Rebecca's recovery. Their mood was somber as they rode across the open prairie, alert for any sign of the thieves or other threats. Rebecca found herself watching Wyatt more carefully than ever, drawing strength from his calm presence and steady determination. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon, promising rain. Wyatt increased their pace, hoping to reach shelter before the storm broke. They were crossing a wide, treeless expanse when the first fat raindrops began to fall. "There's an outcropping of rocks ahead," Wyatt called over the rising wind. "We can shelter there until it passes." They reached the rock formation just as the skies opened. The natural shelter was barely adequate, a shallow overhang that kept off the worst of the rain, but left them exposed to the gusting wind. Wyatt unpacked their meager supplies, including a canvas tarp that had escaped the thieves' notice. He rigged it to extend their shelter, creating a small, relatively dry space. Rebecca huddled beneath the improvised tent, shivering as the temperature dropped with the storm. Wyatt settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "Here," he said, draping his coat around her shoulders. "This will help." "What about you?" she protested. "I'm fine," he insisted, though she could see him fighting not to shiver. Without thinking, Rebecca shifted closer and lifted the coat to cover them both. "We'll share," she said firmly. "There's no sense in you catching a chill." The intimacy of their position was undeniable, seated side by side beneath the small shelter, sharing body heat against the cold. Rebecca was acutely aware of Wyatt's arm pressed against hers, the solid strength of him. "Thank you," he said quietly after a moment, "for thinking of me." There was something in his voice, a note of surprise, as if he wasn't accustomed to being the object of someone else's concern. It made Rebecca's heart ache to think how long he must have been alone, responsible for himself with no one to share the burden. "That's what friends do," she replied. "They look out for each other." Wyatt glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Is that what we are, friends?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I'd like to think we're at least that." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Wyatt's eyes dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes. For a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might kiss her. Instead, he looked away, out at the driving rain. "Storm's not letting up," he observed. "We might be here a while." Rebecca tried to hide her disappointment. "Then we might as well make ourselves comfortable." They passed the hours of the storm in conversation. Wyatt, usually so reserved, told her stories of his travels, the majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the vast salt flats of the western desert, the towering redwoods of California. Rebecca, in turn, shared memories of her childhood in Ohio, her dreams of teaching, and her hopes for a future in the West. As daylight faded and the storm continued unabated, it became clear they would need to spend the night in their makeshift shelter. Wyatt managed to start a small fire near the entrance of their sanctuary, using dry wood he found beneath the overhang. The flames provided welcome warmth and light as darkness fell. "Try to get some sleep," Wyatt suggested as Rebecca stifled a yawn. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she pointed out. "We can take turns." He looked about to argue, then nodded in acceptance. "All right, I'll wake you in a few hours." Rebecca settled as comfortably as she could on the hard ground, using her folded shawl as a pillow. Despite the discomfort and the persistent sound of rain, exhaustion soon pulled her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was of Wyatt's profile silhouetted against the firelight, steady and vigilant. She woke sometime in the night to find that the rain had stopped. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a soft red glow over their shelter. Wyatt was asleep beside her, his features relaxed in a way she rarely saw when he was awake. Without the usual alertness and caution that marked his expressions, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. Rebecca resisted the urge to reach out and touch his face. Instead, she carefully added wood to the fire, stoking it back to life. The movement caused Wyatt to stir. "I was supposed to wake you," he murmured, sitting up. "You should have woken me." "You needed the rest," she replied simply. He checked his pocket watch in the firelight. "It's past midnight. Storm's moved on." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, scented with rain and sage. "I've been thinking," Wyatt said finally, "about what you said yesterday." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What about it?" He turned to face her, his expression serious in the firelight. "I don't know what kind of future I could offer you. I've never stayed in one place long enough to find out." "I'm not asking for promises," she said softly, "just possibilities." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a gentleness that took her breath away, he reached out and took her hand in his. "I can't offer possibilities until I know for certain that you're well," he said. "But I do know that the thought of parting ways at Fort Laramie, it doesn't sit right with me." It wasn't a declaration of love, but for a man like Wyatt, it was a profound admission. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her heart full. "It doesn't sit right with me either," she whispered. Their eyes met in the flickering light, and this time, when Wyatt leaned toward her, he didn't stop. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet certain, a question and an answer all at once. Rebecca responded with a surety that surprised her, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his breath warm against her skin. "We should try to get some more sleep," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have a long ride tomorrow." Rebecca nodded, though sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. As they settled back down beside the fire, Wyatt kept her hand in his, a simple connection that spoke volumes in the quiet night. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of new beginnings. They broke camp efficiently, both aware of a shift in their relationship, but focused on the practical needs of the journey ahead. As they mounted their horses, Wyatt reached across to adjust Rebecca's saddle strap, his hand lingering briefly on her knee. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes communicating far more than the simple question. She nodded, smiling. "Ready." They rode southwest toward Clearwater Creek, making good time across the rain-washed prairie. By mid-afternoon, they spotted the trading post, a collection of log buildings surrounded by a wooden stockade, nestled in a bend of the creek that gave the outpost its name. As they approached, Rebecca noticed a change in Wyatt's demeanor. He became more alert, his eyes scanning the area with professional caution. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they rode through the open gates. "These places can attract rough characters." The trading post was bustling with activity. Trappers, hunters, and travelers of all descriptions moved between the buildings. A group of Shoshone Indians were trading furs near the main store, while several bearded white men lounged outside what appeared to be a saloon, drinking from tin cups. Wyatt led them to a hitching post near the store and helped Rebecca dismount. "Let me do the talking," he said quietly as they entered the building. The interior of the trading post was dim after the bright sunshine outside. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with a bewildering array of supplies from basic necessities like flour and ammunition to luxuries like canned peaches and bolts of cloth. The proprietor, a corpulent man with a magnificent beard, looked up as they entered. "Afternoon, folks," he greeted them. "What can I do for you?" "We need supplies," Wyatt replied. "Heading to Fort Laramie." As Wyatt negotiated for what they needed, Rebecca wandered the store, looking at the various goods. She was examining a display of tin cups when a voice spoke behind her. "Well now, ain't you a sight for sore eyes?" She turned to find a tall, unkempt man leering at her. His clothes were dirty, and he smelled strongly of whiskey despite the early hour. Rebecca stepped back, uncomfortable with his proximity. "Excuse me," she said politely, attempting to move past him. The man blocked her path. "No need to rush off, pretty lady, just being friendly." He reached out as if to touch her hair. Before his hand could make contact, it was caught in a vise-like grip. Wyatt materialized beside Rebecca, his expression cold. "The lady's not interested in your friendliness," he said, his voice quiet but edged with steel. The drunk looked from Wyatt to Rebecca, then shrugged with exaggerated casualness when Wyatt released his wrist. "No offense meant," he muttered, backing away. "Just making conversation." Wyatt watched him leave the store before turning to Rebecca. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her heart was still racing. "Yes, thank you." He placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "Let's finish our business and move on. I don't like the feel of this place." They completed their purchases quickly: food, ammunition, medical supplies, and a new blanket to replace one lost to the thieves. As Wyatt paid, Rebecca noticed a small silver locket on a chain displayed in a glass case near the counter. It was similar to the one stolen from the cabin, not identical to her mother's, but close enough to make her heart twinge with memory. Wyatt followed her gaze. Without a word, he pointed to the locket and added it to their purchases. When the proprietor handed it to him, Wyatt passed it to Rebecca. "It's not the same as your mother's," he said quietly, "but perhaps it can hold the same memories." Rebecca was touched beyond words by the gesture. She fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, they loaded their new supplies onto the pack horse. As Rebecca prepared to mount Dot, she noticed the drunk from the store watching them from across the yard. He was now accompanied by two equally rough-looking companions. They were speaking together in low tones, occasionally glancing in their direction. "Wyatt," she said quietly, nodding toward the men. Wyatt followed her gaze and frowned. "Get mounted," he instructed. "We're leaving now." They rode out of the trading post at a deliberately unhurried pace, though Rebecca could sense Wyatt's tension in the set of his shoulders. Once they were beyond the gates, he increased their speed, leading them northeast toward Fort Laramie. After an hour of hard riding, Wyatt finally slowed their pace, allowing the horses to rest. "I think we're clear," he said, glancing back the way they had come. "But we should find a defensible place to camp tonight. Those men had the look of trouble." Rebecca nodded her agreement. The encounter at the trading post had reminded her of the dangers that two travelers, especially a man and woman alone, might face in the wilderness. She was profoundly grateful for Wyatt's presence and protection. They rode until dusk, finally making camp in a small canyon where steep walls provided shelter on three sides. Wyatt built a fire but kept it small, mindful of the possibility of being followed. After a simple supper of beans and biscuits from their new supplies, they sat close together by the fire. Rebecca fingered the new locket around her neck. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what happens when we reach Fort Laramie." Wyatt looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "If the doctor confirms that I'm recovering well, I'd still like to try for California," she said. "The teaching position may be gone, but there will be others." "And if you're not fully recovered," Wyatt asked cautiously, "then I suppose I'll need to stay somewhere to continue healing." She met his gaze directly. "What I'm trying to say is, whatever happens, I'd like us to stay together." "If you want that too." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, the firelight playing across his features. "I've spent most of my adult life avoiding attachments," he admitted, "telling myself I was better off alone." Rebecca felt her heart sink, preparing for rejection. But then he reached out and took her hand in his. "But these past weeks with you, they've been different, better." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I don't know what the future holds, Rebecca, but I do know I'm not ready to say goodbye to you." It was as close to a declaration as his reserved nature would allow, but to Rebecca, it meant everything. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, a promise in the gentle pressure of her lips against his. When they parted, Wyatt's eyes were dark with emotion. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." They prepared for sleep, arranging their bedrolls side by side near the fire. As Rebecca settled beneath her blanket, Wyatt reached out and took her hand once more. They fell asleep that way, connected by that simple touch, a bridge between their separate pasts and what might become a shared future. The next 3 days of travel passed without incident. They rode through rolling prairies and over gentle hills, following the course of the North Platte River as it wound its way toward Fort Laramie. Each night, they camped in sheltered locations, and each night, their bedrolls moved a little closer together. On the afternoon of the 4th day since leaving Clearwater Creek, they crested a rise and saw Fort Laramie in the distance, a collection of buildings surrounded by a wooden stockade, the American flag flying above the central blockhouse. They paused, taking in the sight. Fort Laramie represented safety and civilization after weeks in the wilderness, but it also marked a potential turning point in their relationship. Decisions would need to be made, paths chosen. "We'll reach the fort by sunset," Wyatt observed. Rebecca nodded, suddenly anxious about what awaited them there. Would the fort doctor confirm her recovery or diagnose her with consumption? Would Wyatt truly stay with her, regardless of the outcome? As if sensing her concerns, Wyatt reached across the space between them and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens," he said simply, "we'll face it together." His words calmed her racing thoughts. She smiled at him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Together," she agreed. They rode toward Fort Laramie as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, their shadows stretching long across the prairie grass. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Rebecca knew with growing certainty that she no longer faced them alone. In the most unexpected of circumstances, she had found not just a protector but a partner, someone who saw her strength as well as her vulnerability, someone who chose to stay when others had left her behind. And for now, that knowledge was enough to carry her forward, toward the fort and whatever future awaited them beyond its walls. Fort Laramie loomed larger as they approached, its wooden walls standing stark against the darkening sky. Sentries posted at the main gate watched their approach with wary interest. "Halt and identify yourselves," called one of the soldiers as they drew near. "Wyatt Owens," Wyatt responded clearly, "and Miss Rebecca Zimmerman. We're seeking shelter and medical attention." The gates swung open, and they rode into the bustling activity of the fort. Rebecca had never seen such a place before. Fort Laramie was like a small town within walls. Soldiers in blue uniforms moved purposefully among civilians of various descriptions. There were stables, barracks, what appeared to be a mess hall, and several other buildings whose purposes she could only guess at. A young lieutenant approached as they dismounted. "Owens, Major Harrington mentioned you might be passing through." He nodded politely to Rebecca. "Madam, the major will want to see you, and we can have the fort physician look at you right away if you're unwell." Wyatt helped Rebecca down from her horse. "We'd be grateful for the doctor's attention," he said. "Miss Zimmerman has been recovering from a serious illness." The lieutenant dispatched a private to fetch the doctor and another to care for their horses. "If you'll follow me, the major is in his office." They were led to a solid building near the center of the fort. Inside, Major Harrington, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and keen eyes, greeted Wyatt with obvious familiarity. "Owens, thought you might be dead by now," he said, shaking Wyatt's hand vigorously. "Who's your companion?" After introductions were made and their situation explained, the major's expression became grave. "Kicked off a wagon train for illness. Disgraceful behavior, though not uncommon, I'm afraid." He turned to Rebecca. "You're welcome at the fort, Miss Zimmerman, for as long as you need to recuperate." The fort physician arrived shortly thereafter, Dr. Ellis, a thin man with spectacles and a gentle manner. He examined Rebecca thoroughly in a small room adjacent to the infirmary, listening to her breathing, checking her throat, and asking detailed questions about her symptoms. "Well, Miss Zimmerman," he said finally, "I believe what you had was indeed pneumonia, not consumption. Your lungs are clearing nicely, though I'd recommend continued rest and care for at least another few weeks." Relief washed over Rebecca in a wave so powerful she felt momentarily light-headed. "So I'm not dying?" she asked, needing to hear the confirmation again. Dr. Ellis smiled kindly. "No, my dear. You're well on your way to recovery. Another month or two and you should be back to full health, provided you don't push yourself too hard." When Rebecca emerged from the examination, she found Wyatt waiting anxiously outside. The look of relief on his face when she shared the doctor's diagnosis made her heart swell with emotion. "That's wonderful news," he said, taking her hands in his. For a moment, she thought he might embrace her right there in the fort's hallway, but he restrained himself, mindful of their public setting. Major Harrington arranged quarters for them. Rebecca was given a small room in the building reserved for officers' wives and other female visitors, while Wyatt was assigned space in the bachelor officers' quarters. The separation was proper, but felt strange after weeks of sleeping within arm's reach of each other. That evening they ate in the officers' mess, the first proper meal they'd had in weeks. The food was simple but abundant, and Rebecca found herself ravenous. As they ate, Major Harrington joined them, bringing news of the wider world. "The situation with the Indian tribes is tense," he informed them. "There have been raids on settlements to the north, and we've had reports of increased bandit activity along the trails." He glanced at Wyatt. "Actually, Owens, that's something I wanted to discuss with you. We're short on scouts, and I could use a man with your experience. I'd be willing to offer you a position here at the fort." Wyatt glanced at Rebecca before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Major, but I need to consider my plans carefully before making any commitments." The Major nodded understandingly. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you're ready." Later, as Wyatt walked Rebecca to her quarters, they finally had a moment alone. "A position at the fort," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "That would be steady employment." Wyatt nodded. "It would." He hesitated, then added, "But it would mean staying here, not continuing to California." They stopped outside the door to her room. In the soft glow of the lantern hanging nearby, Rebecca could see the question in Wyatt's eyes. "What do you want to do?" she asked softly. Wyatt took both her hands in his. "I want to be where you are," he said simply. "If that's California, then that's where I'll go. If it's here at Fort Laramie while you recover fully, then that's what we'll do." The directness of his answer took her breath away. In that moment, Rebecca made a decision. "The doctor said I need another month or two of recovery," she said. "Perhaps we could stay here during that time. You could take the position with Major Harrington, at least temporarily." She squeezed his hands. "And then, when I'm stronger, we could decide together what comes next." Wyatt's expression softened. "I'd like that." They stood together in the quiet evening, the sounds of the fort fading around them as they looked into each other's eyes. Slowly, Wyatt bent his head and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that held the promise of many more to come. "Good night, Rebecca," he whispered as they parted. "Good night, Wyatt," she replied, reluctantly releasing his hands and entering her room. As she prepared for bed in the small but comfortable chamber, Rebecca found herself touching the silver locket Wyatt had given her. Inside, she had placed a small sketch she had made of her parents during the quiet days at the trapper's cabin. It wasn't the same as her mother's original locket, but in some ways, it was even more precious, a symbol of both her past and her future. The following weeks at Fort Laramie fell into a pleasant rhythm. Wyatt accepted the Major's offer of employment, riding out with patrols and hunting parties, but always returning to the fort each evening. Rebecca, following Dr. Ellis's advice, focused on regaining her strength. She helped in the fort's small school, teaching the children of officers and civilian employees, and assisted the quartermaster's wife with various domestic tasks. Their relationship deepened during this time of relative safety and stability. Though propriety dictated separate quarters, they spent their days together whenever possible. In the evenings, they would often walk along the fort's walls, talking about their pasts and cautiously exploring possibilities for their future. 1 month into their stay at Fort Laramie, Wyatt invited Rebecca to ride with him to a nearby meadow for a picnic lunch. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees along the river painted in gold and crimson. They spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree and enjoyed a simple meal provided by the fort's cook. "I received a letter yesterday," Wyatt said as they sat together after eating, watching the river flow past. "From a friend in California." Rebecca looked at him with interest. "What did it say?" "He owns a ranch near Sacramento," Wyatt explained. "Needs a foreman who knows horses and cattle. Says the position comes with a small house on the property." Rebecca's heart quickened. "And you're considering it?" Wyatt turned to face her fully. "I'm considering it because of you." He took her hand, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Rebecca, I've spent most of my life alone, convinced that was how I was meant to be. Then you came along and everything changed." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that caught the sunlight. "This was my mother's," he said, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone who mattered more than my own solitude." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as Wyatt continued. "I'm not a man of many words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know now that a life without you in it isn't one I want to live." He held out the ring. "Rebecca Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you come to California with me, not as my charge or my friend, but as my wife?" Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Wyatt, I will marry you." His face transformed with a smile of such genuine happiness that it made her heart ache. With gentle hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They were married 2 weeks later in the fort's small chapel. Major Harrington gave the bride away, and Dr. Ellis served as Wyatt's best man. Rebecca wore a simple dress of pale blue that the quartermaster's wife had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair and Wyatt's mother's ring on her finger. As they spoke their vows before the fort's chaplain, Rebecca thought of the strange and winding path that had led them to this moment. What had begun as tragedy, being abandoned by the wagon train, falling ill in the wilderness, had transformed into the greatest blessing of her life. In Wyatt, she had found not just a protector but a partner, someone who saw her value and chose her above all others. Their wedding celebration was modest but joyful, with the fort's residents joining in to wish the new couple well. As evening fell, they retired to a small cabin that Major Harrington had arranged for them to use until their departure, their first night together as husband and wife. In the privacy of the cabin, with lantern light casting a golden glow over the simple furnishings, Wyatt took Rebecca in his arms with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Their coming together was a gentle exploration, a loving culmination of the connection that had been building between them since those first desperate days when he had nursed her back to health. Afterward, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Rebecca rested her head on Wyatt's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she confessed softly. "When I joined that wagon train in Independence, I thought I was heading toward a solitary life in California, teaching other people's children, making my own way." Wyatt's hand stroked gently through her hair. "And I never expected to find someone who would make me want to stop wandering." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Funny how life works out sometimes." A week later, they joined a small merchant caravan heading west to California. With recommendations from Major Harrington and supplies for the journey, they set out together toward their new life. Rebecca rode Dot, now officially her horse, while Wyatt led their pack animals. The journey would be long and not without hazards, but they faced it together, stronger for the challenges they had already overcome. As they crested a hill and looked back at Fort Laramie one last time, Rebecca reached over and took Wyatt's hand. "No regrets?" she asked. He squeezed her hand, his eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. "None," he replied. "Not a single one." They turned their horses westward and rode toward the setting sun, toward California and the future they would build together. 3 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of their ranch house near Sacramento, watching as Wyatt rode in from the fields with their 2-year-old son, William, perched in front of him on the saddle. The little boy was the image of his father, with the same storm-gray eyes and determined expression. "Mama," William called, waving excitedly as they approached. "Papa, let me ride the big horse." Rebecca smiled and waved back, one hand resting on her swelling belly where their second child grew. The ranch had prospered under Wyatt's management, and Rebecca had established a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers. They had built a good life together, far different from what either had imagined for themselves before fate intervened on that wagon train journey. As Wyatt dismounted and lifted William down, Rebecca thought back to those desperate days when she had been abandoned by the wagon train, certain she was facing death alone in the wilderness. How could she have known then that what seemed like the end of her journey was actually just the beginning? Wyatt approached with William in his arms, leaning in to kiss Rebecca softly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his free hand coming to rest protectively over hers on her belly. "Wonderful," she answered truthfully. And she was healthy, whole, and surrounded by the family she and Wyatt had created together. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the California sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Wyatt took her hand in his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "About what would have happened if I hadn't stayed behind with you that day?" Rebecca considered the question, her fingers absently tracing the outline of her locket, the one Wyatt had given her at Clearwater Creek, which now contained miniature portraits of both William and Wyatt alongside the sketch of her parents. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember something my mother used to say, that God never closes a door without opening a window." She squeezed his hand. "Being left behind by that wagon train seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me, but if it hadn't happened, I might never have found you." Wyatt brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Then I'm grateful for it," he said simply. "For all of it, even the hard parts, because they led us here." As darkness settled over their ranch and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Rebecca leaned her head against Wyatt's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes what appears to be the end of the road is merely a bend in the path leading to exactly where you're meant to be. In the years that followed, the Owens family continued to flourish. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Rebecca's mother, arrived healthy and strong. The ranch expanded as Wyatt's reputation for fair dealing and hard work spread throughout the valley. Rebecca's school grew as well, eventually becoming a proper schoolhouse with students from all over the county. They faced challenges, of course, drought years that tested their resources, the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers, and the normal trials of family life. But through it all, they remained steadfast in their commitment to each other and the life they had built together. And every year on the anniversary of the day, Wyatt had stayed behind with Rebecca when the wagon train left them. They would take a quiet moment together to remember how their journey had begun with an act of compassion and courage that had changed both their lives forever. It was, Rebecca often thought, the most beautiful kind of love story, one that began not with grand passion but with simple human kindness, and grew into something strong enough to last a lifetime.